Hi guys, it's me PJ, and this week I learned how to ruin a childhood book, and I'm still really mad at myself for doing it. So, you all get to watch me suffer. I hope you enjoy my pain, so let's get started. So this weekend, I decided to reread one of my old favorite books from when I was little, The Penderwicks by Jeanine Birdsall, and I decided to critically read it, and I filmed each chapter and my response to each one to see how differently I remembered it from when I was a kid. Looking back at the footage, I realized I forgot to explain the basic plot and who the main characters were. So what happens is these four girls and their dad and their dog decide to go stay at a cottage for a few weeks in the summer as a little summer vacation. And when they get there, they didn't realize that the cottage was on a much larger estate, and there's a boy the same age as one of the sisters, and a lot of the sisters are around the same age, so he's the same age as several of them. And they make friends with him, and they just sort of go on adventures around the mansion. And the sisters are, in order of their birth, Rosalind, who's 12, Skye, who's 11, Jane, who's 10, and Batty, who's 4, and they make friends with the boy Jeffrey, who is 11. Other characters in the book are their dad, Mr. Penderwick, Cagney, the gardener who works for the estate. He's, I think, 18 or 19. He's heading off to college soon. Jeffrey's mom, Miss Tifton, Churchy, the housekeeper, and Dexter, Jeffrey's mom's boyfriend. Just finished reading the first chapter. Already got some stickies. It was a lot more info dumpy than I remember, I guess. That's how I'd put it. And there was this bit of dialogue between the two characters. And so the first part of the book, they're going to this house to stay for vacation, and it's before like Airbnb or smartphones that have maps, so they're trying to use a map, and the map gets damaged, so they can't find their way. So they ask this guy who runs a tomato stand for directions, and then after he gives them directions, he gives them tomatoes. Like, he just gives them to them, and it's like, yeah, he runs a tomato stand, but like, he runs it. He's trying to make money off it, and he just gives it to these people because they asked him for directions. I finished chapter 2. Skye is way more annoying than I remembered her. Like, she was this stubborn, nerdy character, but she's like, oh, I'm learning algebra for fun going into 6th grade. And I'm like, why would you put yourself through that? Also, the first time she meets Jeffrey, she doesn't even know who he is. And she just thinks, oh, random boy in this random, heavily protected mansion. Totally not going to be related to the person who owns it. Let me just trash talk the person who owns it. And then is surprised when it turns out to be his mother. Just use some common sense. Not too many notes on chapter 4, except that Rosalind's crush on Cagney is probably the most realistic part about her character, because everything else is like low-key Mary Sue-ish. Jane is like still the purest thing ever, and like the only person resembling a feasible character. And there's this part where she's talking about Jeffrey and how it says, quote, right in front of her was a real boy to look at. He didn't have tawny eyes and auburn hair, but Jane all of a sudden understood that brown hair and green eyes could be nice. And for years, everybody shipped like Skye and Jane, because it was clear that, Skye and Jeffrey, because it was clear that Jeffrey liked Skye, and Skye kind of reciprocated when she was like 11, but like, I always was like, oh, Jane and Jeffrey would be cuter, because Jane seems like she actually liked him. But other than that, Skye's an idiot. She's supposed to bake cookies and she puts them on broil, which I think I knew not to do that when I was 6, and Skye's supposed to be the nerdy type. And my only flaw with Jane is she's talking about her sisters to Jeffrey, and she says Rosalind's the prettiest, Sky's the smartest, and Batty was the littlest. And it's like, why do you compare your siblings' intelligence and attractiveness? That's just really weird. Because, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people compare themselves internally, but I don't tell people aloud, oh, this person in my family's so, like, the smartest out of all of us, and this person's the prettiest, and this one just is the youngest, you know? It's kind of weird. So 2 things this chapter. Sky calls her 4-year-old sister an idiot. Sky's 11. That's kind of mean, and a lot of kids I know don't do that because, you know, her sister's 4. And she blames her sister for going into this field where there's a bull, even though A, her sister didn't know there was a bull in the field. B, she was supposed to be looking after her sister. And yeah, and then they do this thing, where they have, like, family meetings of the sisters, and they make this oath to keep all what is said their secret, except in literally every time they do it, they tell something from those meetings to other people, and it's like, what's the point of the oath of secrecy if they tell other people? To no one's surprise, Sky was stupid again, and got herself and her sister stuck in a tree when they could have just gone out later of an actual house, you know, down staircases and not get stuck in a tree. And there's this part where Batty is talking to Jeffrey, and she says, Jeffrey's talking about how, you know, Rosalind's always so attentive, and Batty says she takes care of me because mommy died when I was a tiny baby. And it's like, why did their father effectively have Rosalind act the role of the mother? Like, yeah, she might have kind of stepped into her by herself, but at a certain point later on in the books, the father treats Rosalind like he is the mother of the children, and she's 12 in this book, and she has, like, all these responsibilities to look after her younger siblings. It's just a little... So in this chapter, Jeffrey's birthday party is coming up, and he invites the girls, and they don't have dresses to wear, so they go up to the attic of his mansion, which of course has tons of old dresses, so they're picking dresses for that. And Rosalind's with the housekeeper, Churchy, and she exposits all of why Jeffrey doesn't have a dad, and pretty much it. Not much really happening. So it's Jeffrey's birthday party. Sky doesn't think again and decides to just walk straight in saying hello, so thus they make a weird entrance. I mean, other than that, it's really just Dexter being a creep around, like, prepubescent girls. Dexter's Jeffrey's, not stepfather yet, mom's sleazy boyfriend in this part of the book. And, his mother's awful. So, chapter 9, we learn a few things. Jeffrey's mother wants him to go to a military boarding school because her father was a general, and Dexter the creep just wants to get him out of the picture. They talk about how the Penderwicks girls aren't in their class. I go to a private school, weird flex, but okay. And there are a lot of kids with money, and nobody's like, oh, well, you're out of my class, because that's kind of tacky. Dexter proposes. Yes, so Cagney lives at the estate, I think, for the summer. The book's not really clear about it. And he has these rabbits who he lives in a carriage house apartment, so he keeps the rabbits there. And Batty, unsupervised as always, goes to see the rabbits, loses them, then runs away because she feels like a failure. A mood. But again, no one's watching a 4-year-old, so kind of. So they find Batty. Apparently Rosalind reads Shakespeare, which is kind of weird, but they do acknowledge it's weird this time. Like, it's not weird to read Shakespeare, but she's 12, so it's a little odd. And the dad finally reminds them to be respectful of the owner of the house, even though she's not the nicest person, they are still renting it. So Miss Tifton, Jeffrey's mom, has had this one big garden competition she's been preparing for months, and it's like a big, like, statewide thing. And Sky and Jane are playing soccer with Jeffrey on this one day, and even though they're warned multiple times, they somehow forget the competition and get in the way. So one of them had to remember. One of them. So Sky and Jeffrey have a weird little, well, it's not that weird, it's actually kind of cute. They have a little scene where he's trying to teach her to play the piano because he's really good at music and she's abysmal. I think that's sort of where the Sky and Jeffrey shipping comes from, honestly, that one particular scene. Anyway, no one's watching out to see where his parents are or where Batty is again, because no one ever looks after Batty. And his parents come in and his mom completely overreacts. And she does cross some boundaries, and not really good, but then Sky also crosses some major boundaries, and it just sort of ends in an explosion. So Rosalind isn't a Mary Sue for once, and what happened was, during Miss Tifton's tirade in the last chapter, she not so subtly implied Rosalind traipsing around with boys, losing her virginity, way over line. And so Sky tells Rosalind about this, and then Rosalind feels really weird, sneaks down to the middle of the night to the gardens of the mansion, and she's walking around a fountain, and she hears Cagney making out with another girl, and then out of shock she slips and falls, and Cagney has to carry her home. But, like, while she's, like, walking around the gardens, she's having very, like, actual good, like, thoughts for her age. Like, pretty common thoughts about, like, crushes and stuff. And it's kind of chill. And it's the first time Rosalind hasn't been perfect. And it's kind of nice. Chapter was overall, you know, pretty good. So Sky finally feels guilt for something because Jeffrey's parent drives him to the military academy after all the stuff that's been going on. Jane mentions how she doesn't like revising her work. She writes a lot, and as someone who writes a lot, that's kind of really, like, a dumb approach. She's like, oh, I don't like to edit my original intent, and I'm over here like, girl, the first draft's always bad. But other than that, So it turns out Jeffrey didn't actually end up going to the academy, he was just visiting, but now since his parents, well, his mom and her fiance have seriously told him that they're sending him away next year, he's planning on running away. It's a half-baked plan, but, you know, he's 11, wouldn't have expected anything more. And the girls are agreeing to let him stay there until he can run off. So Jeffrey's mother goes to find him, finds him at the cottage where the girls are staying and hiding him. They have a heart-to-heart, and the end of chapter 17 is left unambiguous. I think there are like 1 or 2 more chapters left. We'll see. I finished! Woo! Chapter 18, the last chapter, they are leaving, they're down the driveway, and then their dad forgets the glasses at the cottage. So he goes back, and everybody's just sitting there for a while. Actually, no, Sky and Jane go to look for Jeffrey. And so Cagney goes up to the car, and Rosalind had been embarrassed after hitting her head and seeing that Cagney had a girlfriend. And so he's like, oh, hold on to your skill at talking to boys, which is, I mean, a little weird. And then he kisses her on the forehead, which is, again, a little weird. But yeah, the book's done. I don't know why I did that to myself. So I finished reading it, and honestly, it kind of made me sad, because this book was a book I really loved when I was a younger child, when I was like 8 or 9. It was one of my favorites, and now that I've noticed like everything wrong with it, it just sort of like ruins the memory. And you could say, oh, well, you finally realized the, like, flaws and stuff, but I don't know, it's kind of sad. So I want to talk about some of the characters and stuff I noticed now. So growing up, as I say that, as I'm still, a legal child, my favorite character out of the sisters was always Sky. I thought she was hilarious. I thought she was super down to earth. I thought she was like snarky and sarcastic, which I really liked. And looking back, I just sort of realized that she's a whiny, self-centered, definitely snarky and sarcastic, but also incredibly stubborn adolescent that would be really difficult to deal with in real life. And Jane is my new favorite character. She's an absolute cinnamon roll. She should be protected at all costs. Her writing arc, I used to love writing when I was little. I still love it now. And her arc about like writing her story, like I found a lot of it was accurate. There were like only 1 or 2 points where I was like, and that was a point where she said she didn't like revising her own work because she believed in her original vision. And I was like, girl, rewrites are a huge part of the process. If you don't want to be a writer, if you want to be a writer, you have to get used to rewrites. So that sort of felt weird. But other than that, like, she was just a decent character trying her best. I will have to say the father is a lot less attentive than I remembered. He's always off somewhere and leaves his like 11-year-old to make sure that the 4-year-old doesn't die, which I mean, I've been called to like babysit younger kids before when I was younger than that, but it wasn't all the time. It would be like an hour or so, like once a week, whereas the girls are basically always watching Batty, their youngest sister. And Rosalind's effectively had to step up to take the place of a mother. And she's 12. She's 12 in this book. And she's stepped up to be a mother. And she's done this for years, as long as Batty's been alive, because the mother died right after Batty was born, I believe. She had cancer? Yeah. Also, there are just certain parts in this book where I think it was meant to be seen as like quaint or charming, but it just didn't work. Like the characters didn't talk realistically. They talked like little adults, but like naive adults, like a young 20-something who'd been sheltered their whole life and was now out in the real world trying to get their philosophy major. They just didn't talk like people their age would, which was hard because when I was younger, I was like, oh, this is how people talk in middle school. And that's not how it works. I don't think there's a single like word in this book of slang. I'm not going to go and say like cursing because I personally don't really curse a lot. There are people who don't curse, but there was no like expressions of slang. There was a lot of formal talk where they could have put in contractions, but it was like, no, we cannot play in the gardens instead of, you guys, we really can't play in the gardens, which was hard in a story that's meant to appeal to younger readers who don't talk all formal and uptight at all times. Jeffrey Tifton, still a good character. I like Jeffrey. I think he's probably the closest to a real person for like his age and his background. Like, I know boys like Jeffrey, and pretty good representation. I mean, it's hard because I used to idolize Sky, and now I'm going back and reading it, and I'm just thinking, why? She forgets about her sister on time to time. And again, I'm not sure if she should have been given as much responsibility as she was, but she constantly forgets about her sister. She's always like focused on herself. She almost burns down a house because she'd rather be doing math. Again, I don't know a single person who does math for fun. If you do math for fun, hello, you're like 1 in a million. But I know like the most dedicated academic people, and they don't do math for fun. It just was a very unrealistic choice. I think the author was trying to make her seem like, oh, she's so Now, like other girls, she plays so much sports, she does math for fun, but she just sort of comes off as like annoying and weird. I didn't really enjoy this process. I wouldn't recommend it. And that's really all I have to say. It was kind of sad. So, that's all, I guess. Bye.